Well, hey, Steve, great to connect again. I always enjoy our conversations. And today, of course, we're talking about how to retrain a broken gut immune system. And so let's talk about the immune system, right? A lot of people ask things like, where is the immune system in our body? What are the organs, or where is it located? And why are so many people having immune system problems today?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back. And it's a really important question because it's kind of core to every other disease. Like, everything else we want out of life, whether we want to be skinny or have a good brain or have a good gut, the immune system's kind of the communication pathway for all those systems. And so, um, the location question, I like to think in visual terms, and I didn't play a ton of video games, but the video games I did play, I always liked it when you could build your own character and you could kind of assign different values. And if you were building a human body and you were assigning the immune system to like various parts of the human body, roughly 70 to 80% of all your immune points or whatever, or your immune cells, they'd be located in and around your intestines. So it really is kind of packed into your abdomen, packed into your gut. But then, of course, it reaches out everywhere. It reaches out to the ends of your, the parts of your brain, your eyes, all the way down to your toes. So it's kind of everywhere. But the central mass of our immune system is in and around our gut, and that's because there's really amazing interplay between the outside world, our gut microbiome, and then the immune system. And it's that connection that I think is getting a lot of, just a lot of play these days because what we saw from the pandemic was a strong immune system, which is what I used to say. Like I would, hey, count me in the camp who wants a strong immune system. What we found is that methodology, that ideology didn't really work because a lot of people died from too strong of an immune system. And so, what I think we're starting to appreciate is the complexity of the immune system, the complexity of the gut immune connection. And I think that opens a new door to being healthier, having the things we've always wanted from our immune systems that maybe we haven't been getting the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so those mucosal membranes, wherever there's mucus, there's going to be immune components in there. And so it goes into your respiratory system, sinuses, all those types of things. But most of that is in the gut, like you were talking about. And so the gut plays such a critical role here. Now, in our society today, we see that more people are inflamed. And I know you guys, your team specializes in working with a lot of tough cases. I know I've worked with many tough cases over the years, and most of these people are already making a lot of nutrition changes, removing toxins. They're using, essential oils. They've got air purifiers. They've got it all, and they're still struggling with chronic inflammation. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think we have learned like our industry, and I think the awareness to health has come a long ways over the last 10 to 20 years. But in the last 10 years, there's just been extreme focus on removing the bad things, removing the inflammatory foods, removing the inflammatory particles from the air, things like that. That I think is that's important knowledge to gain. But what we find is what you're alluding to is people who have gone to very intense lengths to remove the toxins in order to be living an anti-inflammatory life, only to be seemingly more reactive than ever, more right at the edge of inflammation overload than ever. And so what I kind of had started seeing the last couple of years was like, man, maybe this idea of eliminating more and more foods, eliminating more and more things isn't necessarily the only component to the equation to basically producing a resilient human who is in a state of anti-inflammatory rather than a state of just almost ready to be in a total inflammatory meltdown. And so I think we need to move the conversation forward and not there's nothing wrong. Like I have air purifiers, I try to avoid the nastiest of the nasty foods. But I do think we need to now go from trying to live these perfect bubble lives inside of glass containers where we're never cross-contaminated with mold or gluten or something else. And we need to move the paradigm to How do we create a resilient human body in the face of all the toxins in the world, all the Wi-Fi in the world, all the light pollution in the world? And I think the answer is actually in the gut, and it's in this immune system interplay. And I think we're starting to actually develop tools now that can restore that balance and actually move a human who's just eliminating, and just getting kind of worse and more fragile to resilience back to, where health is not maybe their number one concern every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. We want to create resilience. And so all these little stressors, they shouldn't overload our body. In fact, they actually can actually help us become stronger and more resilient, but we've got to be able to adapt to them. And so I think that's really the key. So let's talk more about the gut and the role the gut plays in overall immune function and immune balance.
Yeah, so inside of, especially in the small intestine where a lot of activity is happening, you alluded to the fact that you have all these kind of layers in there, and the mucosal layer is extraordinarily important because right behind the mucosal layer is this one layer of cells. And these gut cells are a bunch of different specialty immune cells. And these immune cells are doing very complex procedures every single day, like all seconds of the day. Some of the cells are actually reaching out into the mucus and into the microbiome, and they're grabbing things and they're saying, hey, let's sample this, almost like a scientist who's trying to look at what's in your water or something. And they're saying, what's going on out there? Other cells are taking information, sometimes cytokine information in, and they're saying, okay, let's release some antimicrobial peptides to kill certain types of bacteria or call the microbiome in certain ways. Other cells are releasing messages from those sampling practices out to the rest of the body, say, hey, we got this thing going on over here. It's inflammatory, it's anti-inflammatory, be ready. So there's this very crazy and cool and complex interplay that's happening all day long inside of the gut. And when you are in a state where your gut is more broken down, and I don't think we need to talk a ton about what that looks like. Like if you're not pooping well, if you're not feeling well, if you can't eat the foods you want to eat, and I'm talking about real foods, I'm not talking about obviously like Crisco and seed oils and things like that. But if you can't eat the normal foods, those are all signs that you have a broken down gut. And probably you have some sort of microbiome issue, probably some sort of mucus issue, maybe some sort of leaky gut issue. And that story has gotten a lot of attention lately. But what hasn't gotten a lot of attention is what happens to the immune system when we get into those states. And I think that's the opening or the possibility here to really restore people's immune systems to tolerance to the world.
Yeah, let's go into more about that.
So I've been talking about it like kind of like tolerance, and I would say like um, tolerance to our outside world. So like if you're in a body that can't do seasonal pollen blooms, right? You have seasonal allergies, even a little bit. Like you take a little Claritin, and you're like, that's not that big of a deal. Well, actually, it is a pretty good red flag. It's an extraordinary red flag if you're a practitioner. You're like, oh, okay, I know that person. That person's got a immune system that's not quite balanced. If you're having reactions to normal foods, if you're having extreme reactions to mold and other sort of things that are floating around the air, these are all signs that your immune system has lost its tolerance to the world. And when this happens, it starts to develop its own sort of like systems and processes that are like a little broken in how it responds to the world. It's almost as if you got a shoulder injury, like a real shoulder issue. You would seek out multiple people to help you with that, right? Because you would need someone maybe to surgically repair it. You would need rehab exercises. You may need manual manipulation from a chiropractor to get everything. Because in the process of harming your shoulder, you still had to eat, you still had to brush your teeth, you still had to take care of the kids. And so you develop these compensatory pathways in your shoulder that you now have to unwind when you go through rehab and you actually get back to a healthy shoulder. The gut is, and the gut immune system is very similar in that it develops compensatory pathways to keep us alive, to keep us doing the best we can do every day with what's happening. And if we don't start to rehab it, like do the tolerance pathways, it's going to stay in these sort of locked in pathways that might be more inflammatory than is necessary for the situation, especially if you've been listening to your show, reading your books, doing all the work, but you're like, why am I still so inflamed? Well, your body might not remember the other way, which is the other anti-inflammatory way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously, the body's always, the immune system's hardwired to try to protect us from something killing us quickly. So, our ancestors throughout the history of mankind, most of them were dying from infections that got into the blood from like a flesh wound or whatever, would spread wildly, get into the lungs, cause pneumonia or the nervous system and cause meningitis or encephalitis and kill us quickly. So, inflammation is there to stop that. But the thing is, we've got to obviously turn off the influx of potential pathogens or pathogenic waste getting into the bloodstream, triggering that alarm, and causing the immune system to be aggravated. And when we have a leaky gut, we constantly have you know bacterial waste, right? Large undigested food particles, things like that, getting into the bloodstream, turning on that alarm. So how does that impact what you're talking about here?
Yeah, so um, it's right on, right? Number one, if you have a like a leaky boat or whatever, like you do need to stop the water from coming in. So we do
Yeah.
need to do the work to heal up a leaky gut, to rebuild those mucosal membranes, to rebuild the microbiome, so that we stop the body from being inundated from even normal things. Like, now we have people that are reacting to kale and strawberries and chicken and it's because their gut layers have broken down so much that these normal daily things are going through. And then, of course, you have your toxins, right? Your LPS toxins, lipopolysaccharide toxins, they're in your oral microbiome, they're in your stomach, they're in your intestines. Like there's no life without LPS, but the body is not a fragile thing. This is a miraculous
Hmm.
thing with all these layers. Like the immune system has so many layers of complexity, and the gut has at least five, but there's sub layers inside there. And when it starts getting broken down, that's when these fail safes kind of start, failing essentially, and you get this constant. It's almost like if someone was giving you like a burn on your arm, they just kept poking you or touching your arm. At some point, your skin cells are going to get red, they're going to get inflamed, they're going to be pissed off. And that's kind of like what's happening inside your gut if you don't have that thick mucosal membrane, if you don't have that microbiome, if you don't have the right oxygen. The gut is just exposed to things it shouldn't be exposed to. And that's just going to naturally create damage, inflammation, cytokines that are going to go out through the rest of the body saying, hey, we have a problem here. Please bring resources. We need to repair. We need to stop this. And so, yeah, there's like I would say step one, which is what I think a lot of the elimination stuff over the last 10 years has been focused on, is like trying to reduce the exposure or the potential to harm the gut. And I think we've made a lot of progress there. The issue is though, if you're still experiencing those symptoms, maybe you haven't tried the new products that we have out there that can help repair those layers. But then also, I find that if people don't address what happens after the gut barrier, you can still see these persistent loss of tolerance to normal things, even after you do heal up your leaky gut. And I think that's the problem with where people are thinking. They're like, if I just
Mm.
get the gut healed, if I just stop the toxins from getting into my body, like the bacteria, things like that, I'll be okay and my body will work fine. And I think what I'm seeing is with there's what 88,000 new chemicals since the 1980s that have been released into our world. There's the Wi-Fi, there's the light, there's all these things. I don't know that our bodies are capable of just snapping back to healthy if we remove and heal the gut. I think there's additional layers that we have to go to.
Yeah, it makes sense. Basically, like increasing the threshold or the resilient factor. So if, let's say, 2 grams of LPS, I mean, I'm sure it's a lot more, that's in the body, but let's just say 2 grams triggers a potent inflammatory response, a huge inflammatory response in the body. We want to get your body resilient enough to where it takes 10 grams of LPS to trigger that inflammatory response rather than just saying, okay, we need to do everything we can to reduce the LPS, right? Which we really can't because that's just going to come from bacterial waste. Or even if it was heavy metals or glyphosate, right? So rather than saying, okay, if it's 2 grams of glyphosate that's triggering a major inflammatory response in the body, let's get your body strong enough to where 2 grams is no big deal, right? And it's able to handle itself until you hit 10 grams, right? So that way you can go out and live your life. And let's say it's, your load that you're being exposed to is roughly, 2 to 5 grams, just kind of cycling back and forth as your body's detoxing and what you're being exposed to. Then you never hit that threshold. You never really have this major inflammatory response. And so you don't have any sort of major symptoms.
Yeah, that is the goal. I mean, it's really similar to like going to the gym and you walk in the
Yeah.
gym and you see these people doing these big lifts or something. You're like, I can't even lift 5 pounds doing that. How can they lift 100? Well, if you work at it for a year or two, you can catch up. You can be at 50, 60 pounds of capacity. And therefore, everything else in life is easier because you built that capacity. And that resilience is what you're talking about. And I think, I know that you're all about the inflammatory pathways. And so I just want to pause on LPS for a
Yeah.
second. I'm a big believer in how do we get rid of LPS. And what's fascinating to me is I don't know if you take curcumin every day, but I do. I take a little bit every day
Yeah.
just because the studies on it are so ridiculously awesome.
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise in the marketplace about what's the best curcumin. Should it be nano? Should it be lipo?
Hmm.
Should it be all these different things? Um, and I've been digging deep into the gut components of LPS, and the number one way to detoxify LPS is actually strong stomach acid. The
Hmm.
second way in your small intestine is something called intestinal alkaline phosphatase. So IAP is basically an enzyme that like grabs LPS, inactivates it so that a bunch of other stuff can happen to get rid of it. Um,
Is
the
that different?
way
That's different than the liver enzyme, alkaline phosphatase, or very similar?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
similar, but
Yeah.
slightly different. So intestinal alkaline phosphatase, the I think the number one way that curcumin is actually helping us is it is the best studied way to boost your IAP production in
Mm,
your small intestine. And
really?
so,
Wow.
yeah, so maybe the anti-inflammatory effects, according to the research I've read, may not be happening systemically. They may be
Mm.
happening right in your gut by taking just regular 95% extract,
Hmm.
skip the black pepper, skip all that stuff that might be harmful to the gut, and just let the gut and the microbiome and the immune cells create more IAP in the presence of curcumin that grabs onto the LPS,
Mm.
and then it doesn't go into your body and it goes out into the toilet. It's really cool, and I mean, for me anyways, I'm like, why buy the super expensive stuff when the data is showing that at least a lot of the potential benefit of curcumin might be happening right in the gut.
Yeah, that's good to know. I think also immunoglobulins can also be real helpful for reducing LPS. But yeah, for a lot of people, that
100%.
LPS is driving up so much inflammation in the system.
Yeah, yeah, that would be an awesome 1-2 combo is immunoglobulins and curcumin.
Yeah, that's great. Now let's talk about, you mentioned 5 layers of the immune system. Can you break that down for us?
5 layers of the gut.
Oh, of the gut.
So
Yeah, 5 layers of the gut.
yeah, yeah. So we've been talking about leaky gut like it's just this one layer of cells that just gets broken apart by tight junctions, and then oh no, our body's broken and we're so fragile. And that's not the body. The body is so resilient, and it's more like a castle, really. And so in the gut, according to a bunch of researchers, this is not necessarily like Stephen's theory. This is me aggregating a bunch of researchers' data and their reports. We basically have these 5 layers of defense. First is the oxygen layer. So in the gut, it's actually extraordinarily low oxygen. It's supposed to be low oxygen in the gut. All of the good bugs that we want are called anaerobic bacteria without oxygen bacteria. It's almost like if you put us on the moon or Mars, like we need
Hmm.
what we need to survive. These bugs, if the oxygen content gets too high, they die. And so, first step is we want the right oxygen environment. The next step is all those chemical messengers coming out from the immune system. These are things like IAP, there's antimicrobial peptides, secretory IgA is something that I'm sure
Yeah.
you measure and the clinic measures a lot on people. These are all molecules that our immune cells are sending out into the gut to cull what's happening, to defend us, to do all kinds of really cool stuff. After that, you have the microbiome. You actually have the species of bugs. We have a microbiome in the small intestine. We have the majority of our microbiome is actually at the bottom of the small intestine and the top of the large
Mm.
intestine. So when people say the microbiome, it's not near the toilet. It's actually up in the middle of your body, right at the top of the large intestine. That's where the majority of it is. And then after that, we have a mucus layer. So we have this, we really want, like you were saying earlier, like just like people think about mucus in their nose and how you want healthy mucosal separation from the maybe the bacteria in the air or something. We want that same healthy separation between our microbiome and potential toxins and our gut cells. And so we have this mucus layer, and then we have the actual physical layer. And so I usually group those two together because they're kind of physical in nature. And then we have the immune layer behind that. And so those layers are all cross-talking. They're all working together to compensate for each other, cover for each other if somebody's tired that day or hurt that day or
Hmm.
whatever. And what you create is you create this really interesting, I call it kind of like the ideal hippie community. Like almost if you think like in the late 60s, the idyllic somebody's watching the kids, somebody's fixing the house, somebody's growing the food, someone's doing the books, like a true specialized, everyone's got a role. And when everyone plays their role and does their role well, you have this thriving community. And the same thing is true in the gut with the microbiome and all the various layers. When that's all happening together, it is wonderfully capable of dealing with glyphosate. It's capable of dealing with some mold exposure. It's capable of dealing with gluten exposure. It is resilient and capable. It's when you start to have breakdown in those layers due to all the things we've already, you've probably already heard, like antibiotics. How do antibiotics destroy the gut? Well, as soon as you take the antibiotic, you cause a killing of a bunch of the bacteria, not just the bad ones, the good ones as well. What this does is it typically reduces the amount of postbiotics or butyrate that's produced. When that happens, the oxygen layer gets flipped. It goes from low oxygen to high oxygen.
And that's
When
because of the
this
impact on the mitochondria, right? So the postbiotics, particularly the short chain fatty acids, help to the and urolithins and different things like that help to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis and mitophagy in the intestinal cell mitochondria. So the mitochondria can function well, and the mitochondria are functioning well. They're producing energy from oxidative phosphorylation and pulling oxygen out of the intestinal environment to use for energy production. So without good mitochondria, if they get stuck in glycolysis, they're not pulling the oxygen out, so there's higher oxygen. So now those obligate anaerobes they die off, and now the aerobic bacteria, which tend to be more histamine producing and whatnot, start to grow.
Yep, totally. And if you want to make it worse, you could layer in the fact that those mitochondria kind of have two fuel substrates, right? They have butyrate and oxygen, or they have glucose. And
Mm-hmm.
they in the intestine, they prefer, especially in the microbiome, the large intestine, they prefer butyrate and oxygen. If there's not enough butyrate, even if they wanted to do their mitochondrial oxphos, they can't. It's not there. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
part of what happens with the antibiotic exposure and why the gut gets all messed up. All these layers start to get impacted. Those mitochondria, when they switch to glucose, they start sending off other signals to the immune system, other cytokines. And not all cytokines are bad. Many of them are inert, many of them are good. And so they start sending off signals to the rest of the body. Hey, we're doing this new game over here. It's less efficient. It's not what we want to do, but we got to do something to stay alive. And that causes a cascade into the immune system as well. And so it's this complex thing. And so when someone says like, "Oh, well, just take a probiotic after you have some antibiotics," like how is that going to address that whole thing we just
Mm.
described?
Yeah, and it can be helpful. A lot of people have gotten benefit from taking probiotics after they've taken antibiotics. But like you said, if that mitochondria, if they start malfunctioning because they're not getting the butyrate, we're still going to have this overgrowth of the aerobic bacteria that's in there.
Yeah. And so, one of the ways in which you can reset your gut is to redo that oxygen balance,
Hmm.
right? If you drive that oxygen balance lower through supplementation, you can force the aerobic bugs they can't exist in in low oxygen. So they're naturally going to
Yeah.
start to die off. And the bugs that thrive in the low oxygen, they're going to start to bloom up because now it's finally possible for them to come out of the mucus, come out and play again because the environment's correct for them. And so you have this 1-2 thing where you also need to, hopefully eat more vegetables. Like, part of grandma's wisdom around eating your vegetables is yes, they contain amazing phytochemicals, anti-inflammatory stuff, but they also contain a lot of the polyphenols that we need for those healthy anaerobic bacteria that make the butyrate that then goes into that mitochondria that restarts that whole process where your mitochondria are healthy, your intestinal cells are healthier, your microbiome is healthier because it has the right environment. And so when you do that loop, that is kind of like one of the first phases of restoring tolerance. That's where you can typically end these elimination diets where you're like, first you were paleo, then you're autoimmune paleo, then you're low histamine autoimmune paleo, then you're low histamine, low FODMAP autoimmune paleo. Like that sort of like continued loss of tolerance to normal foods, part of what's happening with those folks, in my opinion, a lot of the time is this disruption of the oxygen all the way to the mitochondria into the immune system.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so ultimately you should be able to handle, a large variety in your diet. Now, I do think that based on each individual being different, there's kind of a certain fiber or FODMAP tolerance that people have in general. Some people might be on one side of a bell curve, some people on the other. Most people are around the middle, right? But there are people out there that seem to do really well on, higher amounts of animal foods, less plant foods, and there are other people that do a lot better on high amounts of plant foods, right? So I think there's some room for individuality and personalization there, but you should be able to like have a salad and not like just having incredible pain or break out with eczema, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm a huge believer in the bell curve and I'm a huge believer in individualization. And so yeah, you're totally correct. Some people are just gonna end up on one side of that spectrum or the
Yeah,
other, but the amount of people who think they are on the bell curve is statistics. It's not like your feelings about how
yeah,
you think you should be. Most of us should be able to just handle, especially cooked vegetables, even
right.
leftovers, like the histamine issues that we're seeing right now. Part of the histamine is part of the immune system. It's part of this complex. The mast cells, if the mast cells are in with the intestinal cells, if you don't have that healthy microbiome, that healthy oxygen, and that healthy mucus, the mast cells, it's not their fault. They're literally just being exposed to everything all day long. And they're like,
Mm,
histamine, here's some more
yeah,
histamine, you know? And so, yeah, you should be able, no matter where you are on that bell curve, most of us are not the Inuit. We're not on all, we're not built for all carnivore forever. Most of us are not built for like all sweet potatoes forever, like some of the tribes down in the tropics. We should be able to handle in season greens, in season fruits, all those honey,
yeah, for
normal
sure.
things.
Yeah, we shouldn't freak out if you have a salad and you don't feel good. You shouldn't freak out. Oh, it's oxalate poisoning, or if you have a steak and it just sits there in your stomach, you shouldn't freak out about saturated fat or animal protein, right? You should be able to have these meals. Now, you may do better. You may feel better in general doing more plant based, or you may feel better in general doing more animal based. Like I personally do. I feel better that way. But guess what? I can have a big salad. I can have a bowl of steamed vegetables, right, and things like that, and feel fine. And so, there's a certain tolerance point or a certain threshold, and you should be able to have good balance there. But when it's not, when you don't have that, don't just start blaming, anti-nutrients and plants, but instead start looking at these 5 layers of the microbiome and what's breaking down.
Yeah, yeah, we've little over indexed on food. We kind of blame it for all of our problems, and we think it's also the answer to all of our issues. And I think food's just a small part of the equation. What you were describing is like, yeah, can you break it down? Can you deal with it? And then how healthy is your gut dealing with it? Instead of making the steak wrong, if the
Right.
majority of the people around you can handle the steak, it wasn't the steak's fault. It's more about
Yeah.
what's going on with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we repair this? How do you start? How do you go up these layers?
Yeah, so obviously, you and I both know there's a massive spectrum. Like if someone is on 7 foods right now and a boatload of supplements because they are very reactive to their entire world,
Hmm.
their journey and their protocol is going to be a lot longer and a lot more complex. If someone is maybe more upstream from that, they're on that cascade down, right? They started with just like cutting out gluten free, and then they went to paleo, then they went to autoimmune paleo, and then they're on their way down to like low FODMAP, low oxalate, autoimmune paleo. Like if they're the farther you are from like almost nothing in your diet, the easier it is to fix because there's chemicals and there's nutrients in those foods you're cutting out that are absolutely essential for those anaerobic bacteria to grow. And so just like a fire needs oxygen and like wood or something to burn, it needs a spark, our microbiome needs foods to grow. And so I think one of the most important things is trying to improve food tolerance immediately. Like as soon as you can get in whatever supplements you might need. Some people might need stomach acid support. A lot of people, the majority of people will need digestive enzyme support to deal with these foods that they have not been tolerating. Many people will need something like supplemental butyrate to help re-kick that sort of oxygen barrier process off. So I start first with, okay, if you're not like totally on the can't handle anything, let's start with some enzymes and let's start increasing foods. And if you start adding foods back in and you start seeing you like hit a wall because you get eczema, you get a brain fog, you get a headache, something like that, that's a really good sign that we need to take a step back and say, all right, what are the pathways here? If it's headaches, maybe it's histamine. Maybe we do need something like tributyrin to rebuild the mucosal membranes, rebuild the tight junctions, start to, decrease oxygen in the gut, and then that can improve tolerance very quickly. Other people will get kind of halfway up that spectrum. And notice I didn't say probiotics at all. I did like I would
Hmm.
include immunoglobulins. I would include curcumin. To
Hmm.
me, probiotics are higher up that chart. Once you can process food properly and your microbiome is recovering, then bring in the probiotics. Then they're even more amazing because the environment they're entering is so much better tolerated for them, and your immune system isn't going to react to them. There are a lot of people that are taking probiotics where your immune system's reacting to them because
Hmm.
it's kind of those 5 layers are so banged up. And so it's not that probiotics are bad. It's just that in the order of operations, depending on how banged up your layers are, you might need to pull them out. You might need to pull fermented foods out, wait a month or two, and then bring them back in as your gut is getting more tolerant to the outside world. And then, especially then, that's when you can really, things can totally take off to where you're back to that, those layers of health where you can handle so much more. Um, some people will get stuck halfway up, and that's where I think paraprobiotics come in. That's where this gut immune system seems to get a little, it's maybe hardwired the wrong way at this point. If you've done that, if you've done the immunoglobulins, if you're doing your home is dialed, you've done these things, you're doing some enzymes, you've checked for low stomach acid, you checked for low butyrate, like you've done that stuff and you're kind of stuck. That's where I think something like paraprobiotics can come in and totally change your relationship to the food, to your environment.
Well, let's talk about what are paraprobiotics. How do they differ from regular probiotics, and how do they help to balance that immune system?
So they're almost essentially the exact same thing as probiotics. They're just heat killed or
Mm.
inactivated in some way. And so you can think about probiotics as live bugs that have health benefits and paraprobiotics as dead bugs with health benefits. The benefits, according to the research, and there's been over 10 studies of single strains, same dose given to the people. Then they measure like almost everything they can measure inside the body. And what they find is the probiotics do, the live bugs do different things that are health promoting than the dead bugs. The dead bugs do different things. And almost universally, what the dead bugs do is they modify our immune responses in a
Mm.
healthy way. The live bugs aren't necessarily allowed to interact with the immune system like that because, like you were talking about earlier, disease or not disease, but like sepsis or some sort of infection happens when live bugs are coming into the body in a way that's not supposed to happen. A probiotic bacteria is not really seen that much differently if it's alive than a potential pathogenic bacteria. And so the immune system can't really interact with probiotics in the same way that it can with a dead bug. The dead bugs, it'll grab all day long and it'll be like, oh, this is interesting. Well, let's do some changes based on this. And so paraprobiotics in the literature, you see all kinds of health benefits along the lines of skin. So eczema, rosacea, acne. You see eye benefits, periodontal disease benefits. You see brain benefits. Of course, you see like seasonal allergy benefits. Like that's the one of the biggest ones is, folks that are kind of stuck on antihistamines. They can't figure it out, even though they've done all these, good work trying to get healthy. Sometimes your immune system is just not capable of dealing with outside things, and you could take these dead bugs, and it's not the same thing as like grabbing dirt and like smelling it and playing with it. But like when you grab dirt and you smell and play with it, there's a bunch of dead bacteria, dead stuff in that. You breathe that in, and that is associated in early childhood. That's associated with less asthma later. The same
Hmm.
thing if you had like a little farm or you had a dog. There's all this bacteria, and a lot of it's dead. And if a kid is exposed to that in early childhood, later on they have way less inflammatory diseases. And part of that is your immune system is sampling those things out in the world and saying, okay, that's happening. Here's how we respond to that. And usually the response is modulation where you're going back towards resilience. You're not overreacting because that's the biggest thing is a lot of these seasonal allergies, a lot of this is a hypervigilance to this inactivated material in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's helping balance the immune system. So these are heat-killed bacteria, and basically the immune system is making modulation or balancing effect from that. So different than probiotics. Now, on the spectrum of things, do you recommend probiotics? Giving it a go with probiotics before the paraprobiotics, or how do you go about that?
It's totally based on what you want in your
Hmm.
life. Like if you're still dealing with some microbiome issues and some leaky gut and some stool issues in the toilet, you probably want live bugs. You probably want a really well-studied probiotic, not a probiotic that has 12 strains and the
Yeah.
strains are not listed on the back of the bottle, but like a megaspore or
Yeah.
something that's been studied
Hmm.
that I would trust for those types of outcomes. There's also really cool probiotics that are going to be coming out for like your brain, your mood, even muscle, like building muscle through bugs. It's kind of cool. That's cool stuff. If you're in the camp of why am I always so close to an inflammatory breakdown? Why do I have these, rashes that pop up all the time? Why am I having brain fog? Why do I have all these food sensitivities, these food allergies, these environmental sensitivities? That's more on the immune side. And
Yeah.
so for that grouping of issues, paraprobiotics are wonderful at helping that issue.
Yeah, that's great. Now, when you and your team are working with hard cases, I know, let's talk about the healthy gut products. I know I use a number of these as well. And so you start with the oxygen layer, I would imagine. So the Tributyrin X, and then you're also probably supporting stomach acid if that's needed, enzymes. So you got your holozyme. What was your stomach acid support product again?
HCL guard.
HCL Guard. Yeah, exactly. So helping support that. Now, when do you throw paraprobiotics in with that mix, or how do you go about like transitioning on off, and going through the protocol?
Yeah, yeah, we because they're technically safer for an immunocompromised individual because they are dead already, they don't pose a actual risk to the immune system. So
Yeah.
if you're immunocompromised, they're extraordinarily safer. They're also safer for, kids, although some of these
Hmm.
strains have been studied in kids, the product itself hasn't been studied in kids. Um, I do actually start people on Holozymes, Tributyrin X, and then Holoimmune, the paraprobiotic blend
Yep.
immediately. And that's kind of our like 1, 2, 3 punch to
Mm.
change the food particles with the enzymes, make sure they're not showing up the way that they've been showing up. Make sure they're fully broken down so you can get the nutrients, try to sequester the anti-nutrients. The Tributyrin X is going to totally change the butyrate experience. It's going to start healing all 5 layers. And then the Holoimmune, while you're introducing those foods that you maybe have struggled with, whether it's strawberries or maybe it's a FODMAP or whatever it is, you're taking it in conjunction with a product that's telling your immune system to not be so reactive. So we're
Mm,
changing the structure of the food with the enzymes. The butyrate's protecting the cells so they don't get so mad about everything. And then the holoimmune is literally giving your body a different signal while it's receiving the signal that has failed in the past. And what we're
mm.
seeing is a tolerance, like it's like this feed forward loop where tolerance increases very quickly to normal life, to normal cells. And then, yes, as you mentioned, like if you knew someone was having issues in their house or they're being exposed to a lot of things, you'd probably want to add on other products, maybe
Yeah.
the immunoglobulins or something. If you knew that they had stomach acid issues or they displayed symptoms of that, you'd probably add on HCl guard. But the combo of the three in general is usually extraordinarily safe and tolerated, even for people who are very reactive to a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Yeah, I like to add in immunoglobulins, like with people with histamine issues, things like that. It just, along with the Tributerin X, I feel like it helps. At the same time, we're decreasing the oxygen. We're also pulling out a lot of those, histamine producing bacteria and things like that. So I feel like it speeds the process up, the transformation of the gut a little quicker. But yeah, I haven't used the holoimmune, so I'm interested in experimenting with that as well here.
Yeah, it's been kind of the unlock, especially for the
Yeah.
histamine folks who get stuck or anybody who's kind of stuck adding things back in. Like they've made progress, but they're like, there's still whatever their body's resisting normal life. Holoimmune is a way to go throughout the upcoming allergy season. It's a way to go through foods that, like maybe corn's been an issue for you in the past. A lot of people can use holoimmune to kind of bust through those plateaus of tolerance with the outside world or the inside world with food.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you guys are doing great work over here at Healthy Gut, and you guys can obviously get all those products at Healthy Gut. We also sell them on our drjockers.com store as well. And a lot of practitioners are using your products, seeing great results. So keep up the great work, Steve, all the great research. Any last words, inspiration, or anything else that people need to know?
I mean, the process keeps unfolding from there. So that's when you would start to add in your prebiotics, maybe, your mega pre and your mega,
Yeah.
your spore biotics or whatever. Like that's the stack as you keep going into the life. And then, I take a probiotic, I take a prebiotic. So it's not like I'm anti those things. I just
Hmm.
think depending on where you are in your life cycle, they matter in their reintroduction phase. So, other than that, I mean, I think the biggest thing I want people to know is that I don't think more elimination is necessarily the answer if you've already done some of that. I think it's using immunoglobulins, it's using holozymes or tributylnex or these things to build resilience because as much as you and I would love to probably like if we were given a magic wand to change the amount of chemicals in the world, if we were able to change the way Wi-Fi is done, like there's a lot of things that I think you and I would change. GMOs, glyphosate, all this stuff.
Hmm.
I don't see it changing
Yeah, true.
anytime soon.
True.
And so to me, the damage is done, and I'm going to stop being angry about the damage and start focusing on how do I build bodies that can deal in a world that's less than ideal.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially in this natural health world where it's like I go on social media or whatnot, and everybody's let's say I put a picture up of I don't know, a strawberry. People are like, oh, histamine, right? Or a bag
Yeah.
of spinach or something. People are like, oxalates, you're getting oxalate poisoned, right? And so like everybody wants to blame foods, right? And natural foods, real foods. Okay. And certainly there's some variation. Like you may do better on, a little bit more animal based or certain things. But ultimately we should all be able to eat real foods, a real food diet, and not have these kind of reactions. And I think that's ultimately what you're trying to get at. And the message here is, hey, if you're sticking with real foods, okay, you should be able to consume these without having negative inflammatory reactions. And we shouldn't just be pointing fingers at oxalates and lectins and animal protein or whatever it is that you want to that people are pointing their finger at.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort of like food porn around anger and it's pretty, you're not
Yeah.
gonna you're not gonna get what you want unless you just want to be angry at strawberries and spinach, which, are delicious. So,
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Steve, thanks again so much, guys. You can find him at healthygut.com. Great website, great products. Thanks again for your time, Steve. Everybody be blessed.